Hello. I got back a few days ago from just over 2 weeks away, speaking around Britain and in the Netherlands. And it was brought home to me yet again the fundamental challenge that we face in defending what is left of freedom of speech. And, if anyone's kind of watching this who's seen me do videos recently on this subject, saying, oh, yeah, that hype's going on about freedom of speech and all that stuff, what else is on? Well, they should contemplate on the fact that without freedom of speech, there is no other freedom. And that freedom to express an opinion, a freedom to express a view that's different from the prevailing official narrative, is now being deleted by the day. And if we don't get our arse in gear pretty damn quick in challenging this, then there'll be no freedom left. Not least for children and grandchildren, when it will be far, far more extreme than even it is now. And we need to realize and have the guts, the courage to talk about the fact that there is a tyranny in our midst, which I call ultra-Zionist hate groups. They are tiny in number, tiny in support, but they have on their side what I call a coalition of the gutless, and thus their ability to get what they want and to silence people is infinitely greater than their number. And I call them hate groups because that's what they are. They set out, once they've got a target, they set out to get people to hate that target. To hate that target and dismiss them as racist, bigots, fascists, so that they can be silenced. And so there are enormous efforts at the moment to silence me. Also affected are attacks on Pink Floyd's Roger Waters. And we have seen that these ultra-Zionist hate groups target Jewish people and Israeli-born people who challenge their tyranny even more viciously than anyone else. Look at the treatment of the American academic Norman Finkelstein for challenging the behavior of Israel. Look at the treatment of the Israeli-born British activist and musician Gilad Azmon for doing the same. The radio show host Richie Allen has recently faced a campaign from these ultra-Zionist hate groups, I repeat, tiny in number, to fire him from a radio station he doesn't even work for, because they're not very bright. They have lots of that and lots of support within the system, but they're not very bright. Another one tried to get my son Gareth fired from a gymnasium company didn't actually work for. So they're not very bright. But the point is, they are seeking to destroy, in any way they can, anyone that says anything that they don't want people to hear. And, when there are attempts to silence people like me by going to speaking venues, lying outrageously about my views to get me to get the venue to cancel. at least some extent, the fact that they're doing that gets circulated. But what people don't hear about are the doctors, the teachers, the people in other professions who are targeted by these ultra-Zionist hate groups to destroy their careers and get them hated for the crime of saying something that the hate groups don't want people to hear. And this is now reaching hysterical proportions. A point where the most basic human right, freedom of expression, is under pressure like never before, certainly in modern times. Two of these hate groups in Britain are called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, the CAA, and another one called the Northwest Friends of Israel, who were involved in the last couple of weeks in trying to get my events cancelled, and have been involved in attempting to do that over a period of time now. They've been incredibly unsuccessful, except at Manchester United, last week. But we found another venue anyway. But the fact that A, they are trying to destroy freedom of speech, and B, this coalition of the gutless, including Labour MPs and anti-racist organisations like Kick It Out, involved in racism in football, and the media in general, that report them with great sympathy while demonising their targets. If we don't start to realise the significance of this and how it's being ramped up, there will be no freedom left, because people are being frozen in fear and intimidation of calling these organisations out for what they are, hate groups. And just to give you, before we go any further, an idea of the scale of mendacity that we are dealing with, because all they have to do is throw mud and throw mud. One of the reasons I call them the coalition of the gutless, these people, is none of them will debate with you. The Zionist hate groups won't debate with you. Even they throw mud and bile at you, won't debate with you. The Labour MP who was involved in supporting them to get my book launch dinner event at Manchester United cancelled, refuses to debate with me. Kick It Out refuses to debate with me. None of them will debate with me about what they claim about me and what they're doing. And I've offered to debate them all at the same time. Just little me against all of them in a single public debate. They refuse. And one of the reasons, or the key reason they refuse, is they can't justify what they're doing with facts. So don't put me in a public debate where those facts can be highlighted and the way that they've behaved exposed for the outrage that it is. So give you an idea of just how mendacious, can I say mendacious? Seems not. And outrageous this campaign to silence me has become. I'm supposed to be a racist, and thus I have to be silenced, because we can't have that. This is my philosophy on life that I've been writing about for nearly 30 years. I say that we are all points of attention in the same infinite consciousness, state of awareness. And all these things that people are encouraged to self-identify with, race, religion, culture, country, income bracket, class, are just experiences, brief experiences for that infinite state of awareness, that point of attention, which is the real, eternal, and infinite I, in the case of all of us. So what I'm saying is, whether you self-identify with being Jewish or Islamic or Christian, black, white, whatever, we're all the same consciousness having different experiences. And if we self-identify who we are with the experience instead of the infinite I having the experience, there you have the infinite fault lines for divide and rule. Race against race, religion against religion, income bracket against income bracket, and it's all a load of tosh. So, I have, whether people agree with that or not, I produce plenty of evidence to support it in the books, but that's not the point. Whether you agree with that philosophy on life, that perception of who we are, what cannot be questioned from what I've just described is that my philosophy is the ultimate non-racist philosophy, because I say race is an irrelevance, a diversion, and just a brief experience for the same one consciousness experiencing all the races. Somehow, that philosophy is dubbed racist. These ultra-Zionist hate groups call me a modern-day hate preacher. When I'm going around the world saying to people, if we're going to sort the world out, we need to love each other, because look what hating and fighting each other has created. But then you see, the efforts to silence people like me are nothing to do with race. If you cannot demonize someone by what they are saying, then lie about what they are saying and demonize them that way. And you will get the coalition of the clueless, the coalition of the spineless and the gutless, like Manchester Labour MP Kate Green, like Kick It Out, and all these other people, to support you in demonizing your target while doing no research whatsoever into whether what you're saying is true about them. This is how it works. And so the trick is, the hoax is, to take people who are questioning some of the behavior of Israel, outrageous in relation to the Palestinians, and other outrages, not by Jewish people, but by a tiny number that I call Rothschild Zionists, who the vast majority of Jewish people don't even know exist, never mind support what they're doing. Ask Jewish people in Britain if they've ever heard of the campaign against anti-Semitism or the Northwest Friends of Israel, even in the Northwest. And they'll say, most of them, never heard of them, mate. They have no idea what these hate groups are doing in their name, and therefore having them tarred with the same brush as the hate groups when it's nothing to do with them and not their responsibility. And the reason these hate groups, which connect into the Israeli embassy in London and on through into Israel itself, the reason they use he's anti-Semitic, he's racist, the reason they use that, nothing to do with the fact that I'm not. Got a racist cell in my body. Nonsense. It's to control the narrative. Because, like I say, if you cannot demonize somebody by what they're saying, then say they're saying something else and demonize them that way. And here's a little clip from a former minister in Israel, in which she is describing how this anti-Semitic silence the opposition hoax or trick works.
Yours is a voice of criticism we don't often hear in the United States. Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
And that is exactly how it works. That's what's being used against me. That's what's being used against Roger Waters and all these other people. And you know, when you listen to that, something almost unimaginable comes into focus. And that is that these ultra-Zionist hate groups and their network around the world are actually exploiting the horrors that Jewish people suffered in Nazi Germany to justify their personal agenda today. It makes me almost speechless that they can have so much contempt for the people who suffered in Nazi Germany, that they can exploit them for their own ends now and their own political agenda now to silence any opposition. It's worth letting that sink in. Labour MP Kate Green in Manchester, and Kick It Out, and all these other people that just supported that crap and believed the lies and denied freedom of speech on the basis of that without checking any facts. That's the mentality that you were supporting and will no doubt support again. It's unfreaking believable that that mentality can have so much power, but it does, because people are intimidated, people are frightened. Let's take the example of what happened at Manchester United. I launched a new book called Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told. And I talked in Edinburgh about it. Now, the person that ran the venue in Edinburgh had spent a lot of time in Israel, and she was approached by the Zionist hate groups. You must not let him speak. Only we can have freedom of speech. And she actually got a barrister to look at what I was saying to see if it was racist. He decided it wasn't. You know why? It's not. And then I go to speak in London, and they try to stop that at the Troxy venue in London. And again, the owners looked at what I was saying, let it go ahead. Then we come to Manchester. Now, we had a contract with Manchester United. They tell me it's a giant football club. Well, it might be giant in size. It might be giant with trophies. But it ain't giant with integrity, as you'll see. So we had a contract, and it was a dinner for 250 people. And many of them would have been Manchester United supporters, ironically. And it was going to be in a room at Old Trafford, Manchester United's ground. Right up to the Thursday afternoon before the event on the Friday, my son Jamie and others in the team were in contact with Manchester United staff about the event and all the arrangements. On the Friday morning, and of course these anti-Zionists, they're not the opposite, of course, these ultra-Zionist hate groups, they were trying again to get Manchester United to pull. And I doubt they would have achieved it. But then Kate Green, Labour MP, comes on the scene, virtue signalling in all directions. Oh yes, this is terrible. I'm going to call Manchester United. I'm going to get this stopped. What does she know about me? What the hate groups had told her. Then Kick It Out got pulled in. Oh yeah, racism, football. We can't have that. Oh, what do you know about me? Kick It Out. How many books you read? None. So how do you know that what you're saying is true? Well, the ultra-Zionist hate groups told me. Exactly. This is how it works. And ironically, the very same groups that this Labour MP in Manchester, Kate Green, was supporting to deny my freedom of speech were the same groups that accused the Labour Party a little while ago of anti-Semitism. So what was going on, Kate? Oh, I'll tell you what I think was going on. Well, we've been called anti-Semitic, and so what I can do is I can say to these groups that have called us anti-Semitic that, oh, look, we're not anti-Semitic because we're trying to get this anti-Semitic David Icke stopped at Manchester United. Look what I've done. Virtue signal, virtue signal, virtue signal. Do you know something? The sight of a major political party, or a representative of it, getting down on its knees and cowering to virtue signal to a tiny ultra-Zionist hate group or groups who are the accusers of them and their Labour Party is pathetic. But that is why I describe these people as the coalition of the gutless. Because they won't stand up and say, what do you mean? Cancel the event. He has a right to freedom of speech. You may not agree with what he's saying. He doesn't agree with what you're saying. He's not trying to get you banned. Why are you trying to get him banned? Why do you have no respect for freedom of speech? No, none of that. And that's what politicians should be there for. But they're not. They're there for what's best for me in the circumstances. And so what happened is Manchester United, at 10:30 in the morning of the day of a dinner for 250 people, many of whom are their supporters, that involved a contract that had been signed months ago, pulled the book launch. Fortunately, everyone rallied round in Manchester. Lots of people did anyway, and we got another venue. And so while the hate groups were punching the air, they just realised, actually, no, we've not succeeded in denying his freedom of speech, much as we tried. And Manchester United didn't even tell us they'd cancelled. We found out on social media. And when my son Jamie, who'd been in contact with them and was overseeing the whole thing, he drove out to Old Trafford after we saw on social media that they'd cancelled, to speak to the people he'd been dealing with all this time. They wouldn't speak to him. Manchester United, giant football club, no integrity, gutless. And not only that, they got the security to escort him off the premises. And you know why they treat people like that in those circumstances, and why that whole scenario I've just described has happened again and again with different venues, where once the hate groups get on and their coalition of the gutless, then suddenly they cancel an event but don't even bother to tell you. And the reason is this: once you have demonized someone as a racist, even though it's the last thing they are, they no longer are treated as human. They're now anything goes with. They're racist, they're horrible, because the hate groups have got people to hate the target. Therefore, they're not human. Therefore, they don't need the same common courtesy and the same integrity as everyone else. No, oh no, ooh, they're racists. Oh, cancel it. You're going to tell them, oh no, cancel it. They don't matter. Racists. That is how it works. And the other common theme that you get, we saw this with Manchester United, is when it's announced that they are cancelling, they say, well, we didn't know that David Icke was involved. They never told us, because this is what they have to say to explain why they took the booking in the first place, when now it's accepted he's a racist. And what that is all about, oh, we never knew. First of all, Manchester United, you are lying, because you absolutely knew from the start. In fact, the fact that other venues had cancelled in Manchester, like the Lowry Hotel in the city, was all discussed with you, and you said, you take the booking anyway, we won't bow to pressure. Well, you bloody did, of course. But to then come out and say, we never knew, that is a lie. Why is it a lie? Because even the so-called giant Manchester United is terrified of being dubbed racist by these hate groups. That's the scale to which we have reached. And how ironic can you get than to be dubbed racist by the most racist ideology on earth, in which racism is fundamental to everything that they do? People who totally self-identify with race, when I'm the opposite, saying it's just an experience, it doesn't matter. And I'll give you a story this week, just a topical one, just to show you the hypocrisy that we're dealing with here. Israel plans to block Arabs from living in 1,000 neighborhoods. It's not racist. It can't be racist. Israel is planning to block its Arab citizens from living in almost 1,000 neighborhoods and villages under the pretext that they were built for Jews only. Imagine if anyone else in the world did that. What would it be? The most basic racism. But no, they can do what they like. Just everyone else is racist and cannot have freedom of speech. According to a report in Haaretz, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, is set to discuss a law to build Jewish-only areas in the country. Describing the proposed legislation as racist, the director of the Alternative Planning Center, which specializes in planning and construction, said that it aims to prevent Arabs from living in new neighborhoods. Hannah Swede added the municipalities used to prevent Arab citizens from living in Jewish neighborhoods, but this practice looks set to become enshrined in law. Now, on any basis, that is racism, that is apartheid. But you pointed out the racist nature of Israel, and the racist nature of ultra-Zionism, and you're a racist. And the coalition of the Gutless, the Labour MPs, and all these other people will support them in denying freedom of speech as a result of them being called out for what they are. Unbelievably extreme racists. And, you know, like I say, this targeting of people's freedom is becoming more and more intense, more and more extreme, more and more all-pervading. And the people they target most vehemently are Jewish people that challenge this nonsense. And lots of Jewish people do challenge the extremes of Zionism. You just don't hear about them. You only hear about the zealots and the hate mongers. And it's a great irony that Manchester, where this Kate Green is an MP, had another Labour MP who's now no longer with us, unfortunately, big time unfortunately, called Gerald Kaufman. He was a Manchester MP, and he was a Jewish man. And he was a Jewish man of immense integrity. Someone who didn't come from his background's point of view on every subject, in every situation. He called it like it was. He called racism racism when it was Jewish racism, even though he was Jewish, and he was very unpopular among the hate groups as a result. We had the grotesque sight when Gerald Kaufman died, a thoroughly decent human being, of the campaign against anti-Semitism, the CIA, writing a absolutely stomach-turning condemnation of him after his death, when he had more integrity in that than they'll have if they live to be 1,000. And you know, Kate Green, if Gerald Kaufman had still been alive, do you know who would have been on the front line protecting my freedom of speech in Manchester? He would. Such is the decline in standards and integrity continuing in politics. And then, like I say, we had this Kick It Out organization, which is pledged to remove racism in football. Brilliant. We don't want racism anywhere. It's childlike. But, you know, these organizations, including the ultra-Zionist hate groups, have to be very careful and very honest with themselves if they're not to become, as the Zionist hate groups are, a mirror of what they rail against. This is what Kick It Out said on Twitter after the Manchester United event was cancelled on the day. Whilst we are concerned that David Icke was allowed to book an event at Old Trafford in the first place. Have you ever read a book of mine? No. Ever heard me speak? No. How do you know that you're concerned? Ooh, well, the Zionist hate groups told me. Yeah. We are pleased the appropriate action has been taken at Manchester United and the event has been cancelled. We are pleased that another human being has had his basic human rights deleted. And you are an anti-racist group. This is the danger with anti-racist groups. And I'm all, you know, racism in football. I remember the time, because I'm old enough, when black players first came into British football. And every time they got the ball, there were monkey sounds from the crowd, and sometimes even bananas thrown on the pitch. So I've seen racism in football, and it's disgusting. We're not at that level now. We're nothing like at that level now. But is there racism in football? I'm sure there is, and it to be um, needs to be highlighted and dealt with. Yes, but here's the danger: these anti-racist groups, in their various forms, their reason for being is the existence of racism. Their sources of funding are based on the existence of racism. And ironically, the more racism that is highlighted, the more significant these organizations become, and obviously, by definition, the greater the funding. And these, kick it out, doesn't matter what it is, these anti-racist groups, they need to start looking in the mirror and making sure that they're not seeing racism where it's not, because it suits them for racism to be highlighted, even where it's done unjustly, unfairly, and mendaciously, as these did with me. Because, discrimination against people, like the discrimination against me and others in terms of allowing us to speak when others can, discrimination against people goes both ways. And you discriminating against others is no different to those that genuinely discriminate against people on a racist basis. You dubbing people racist who are not is just as bad as the racism you say you are trying to remove. And you need to start looking in the mirror, kick it out, and your like, and just have a little question regularly about whether you are exhibiting some of the very same traits that you rail against. In terms of the ultra-Zionist hate groups, they are fundamentally doing that quite demonstrably. The hysteria is just ridiculous. I went on from Manchester to speak in Maastricht, all day Maastricht, near the German border, and right up to the afternoon before, these Zionist hate groups are trying to get it called off, and the hysteria is unbelievable. And so what they do is they ramp up and ramp up and ramp up the claims. Every time a venue says, no, we've looked at what the guy's saying. He's not racist, so he's going to speak. So now they ramp it up then. They get more and more hysterical. So what we've had come in recently is that he's a Holocaust denier. Do I deny that appalling things happen to Jewish people in Germany? What have I just said earlier? How disgusted I am that these hate groups are actually exploiting that for their own ends now. But keep repeating it, and people believe it. Well, okay, Green will. Kick it out will. And but the greatest one in Maastricht was someone actually wrote that my being allowed to speak, saying things like, we need to love each other. Look what hate and conflict has done. That racist experience, just an illusion, not who we are. That me speaking was, quote, a direct threat to his life. This is the madness and the insanity that we are dealing with. And funnily enough, I spoke for 10 hours and the guy somehow survived. And then we come to the media. The media there's two levels to it. There is the Zionist biased media. There's that part of it, absolutely there is. But there's also the terrified part of the mainstream media that might not agree with it, but are terrified of not supporting what the hate groups are saying. So if you take the coverage of the cancellation of the Manchester United event, the papers repeated from the press release or the statements of the hate groups what I am supposed to be and what I'm saying. They put it in their headlines. I've seen headlines in the last few weeks like Holocaust denier, David Icke, event cancelled, and all this stuff. And that's straight off the pages of these hate groups. And they never, and I mean never, never, right up to this day, ever come to me and say, well, is it true? Well, these people are saying this, is it true? Do the venues like Manchester United ever come to me and say, well, hold on, these people are saying this, is it true? No, they just repeat it. And I've called or emailed some of these papers when they've appeared on their online sites and said, before I call my lawyer, would you please just send me all the evidence you have that what you've said about me in this repeated press release from these hate groups, the evidence you have that it's true. Every time, and I mean every time, within 2-3 minutes, the story's taken down. Why? Because they don't have any. And the suppression of criticism of Israel and ultra-Zionism in the media is now so unbelievably blatant. People like Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, he's a famous guy, he's a famous musician, he has very powerful things to say in his opinions on the Israeli treatment of Palestinians. In any journalistic situation, on the basis of news interest and public interest, he would be on the news shows being interviewed. But he's not. He's not. And as he says, he's told that the decision not to have him on comes from above. Of course it does. This book, the launch was all about everything you need to know but have never been told, is absolutely explosive over a great number of subjects, including this one. Now, any journalistic, proper journalistic person with news values and public interest values would actually be all over that. Oh my God, look what he's saying. Look at the evidence he's got to back it up. They don't want to know. It's just a wall of silence about the fact that it's come out. Or they'll have a go at me about the fact that I'm this and I'm that and he's horrible, but they won't cover what I'm saying. And this week there was a story of a guy called Rowan Somerville, and he was a mainstream producer in mainstream television, worked for Channel 4 and MTV and other mainstream outlets, written a few books. He's not into conspiracies and all that stuff that people wave away. He might be a bit more now after his experience, but he came across a story, a fantastic story, in Israel. There was a human interest story, which he wrote the book about, involving a terrorist attack and also a Palestinian, I think he was a chemist, who was shot dead as a reprisal for the terrorist attack. And then the family of the Palestinian man donated his heart to save the life of a Jewish settler, illegal settler in the West Bank, I seem to believe it was. And the book is about that story. a wonderful human story to explore. Um, and of course, something you would think the newspapers and the media, especially with all these 24-hour stations, all that time to fill, would be all over it. What a great story. What an amazing story. Tell me about it. What happened? But because he says that his experience in Israel is that it's an apartheid state, and other criticisms of Israel, certainly up to last week, apart from the Richie Allen show on davidicke.com, the mainstream media won't review it. And when he was trying to get it published, he did in the end through an Irish publisher, but when he was trying to get it published, publishers were saying, well, I can't publish it, but if it was a bit more pro-Israel, then we would be interested. What on earth is the power of Israel? What is it about Israel? These are legitimate questions that allow such a vast area of power and influence from a country of 8 million people in a global population of 7.5 billion. And so here's a wonderful example of how or why the mainstream media and its journalists are terrified of saying anything that's outside the parameters imposed by the ultra-Zionist hate groups. This is a story of someone called Helen Thomas, very, very famous, legendary journalist in the United States. She's known as the First Lady of the White House Press Corps. She's of Lebanese descent. And 10 presidents came and went while she was a White House correspondent. She started with the Kennedy administration in the 1960s and came right up to Barack Obama. President after president, she became an icon in American journalism. And after all those decades, as she was getting close to her 90th birthday and still working as a full-time journalist at the White House, something happened to destroy her career. Guess what it was? The reason that she was set up as she was, I'll come to how she was set up, or at least one of the reasons, is that not long before, she had questioned at the White House when Obama was taking questions. Did he know of any country in the Middle East that had nuclear weapons? Now, she knew that Israel has a massive arsenal of nuclear weapons that they don't talk about, and it's official American policy that they don't ask. Obama knew that Israel had a big nuclear arsenal. But of course, if they don't talk about it and admit it, they don't have to be subject to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty or Non-Proliferation Treaty, and thus they can do what the hell they like by never talking about it. And what happened is that she asked this question, and what followed was at least one interview in which she talked about why she asked that question and talked about her feelings of the appalling bias in the reporting of the Israel-Palestinian conflict and the appalling treatment by the Israeli regime of Palestinians. And that was the start of a sequence that led to this setup, which I'll come to. Now, this was the question that that Helen Thomas asked of Barack Obama.
Helen, this is my inaugural moment here. I'm really excited.
Mr. President, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons?
With respect to nuclear weapons, I don't want to speculate. What I know is this, that if we see a nuclear arms race in a region as volatile as the Middle East, everybody will be in danger. And one of my goals is to prevent nuclear proliferation generally. I think that it's important for the United States, in concert with Russia, to lead the way on this. Okay? All right. Sam Stein, Huffington Post. Where's Sam?
So President Obama really never answered your question about nuclear weapons in the Middle East, and obviously
it would be
you were
pitiful
asking...
if we took his answer truthfully, because he said, I didn't want to speculate. Well, the president is not supposed to speculate as to who has nuclear arms or not. He's supposed to know.
Well, obviously, we know he knows, and this is this great we know, and he knows
I was
we know we know.
testing his credibility.
So that's it's actually quite a profound question, because it goes to the whole Middle East, U.S. policy in the Middle East. Not only does the U.S. have a kind of double standard on nuclear weapons when it comes to Iran and such, but what do you make of Obama's whole Middle East policy? Is there a break with Bush here or not?
Too one-sided in favor of Israel. He ignores all the horrors that have happened to Palestinians. Their country taken away, thousands imprisoned for many, many years. We give them arms, we give the aid to Israel, as it continues to occupy and just treat the Palestinians like they're newcomers, and these are Europeans who come there, who have no ties to Palestine.
When President Obama was elected and was first discussing foreign policy, there was a suggestion from him there would be a new approach to the Middle East. He made his speech in Cairo. He suggested, not suggested, he said that Israel should stop any settlement expansion. What's happened since all of that?
He took the easy way out, which is to go along with Israel, which most countries do. They had the power, propaganda, and everything else to sell their point of view. Palestinians have no voice.
Not long after that interview, Helen Thomas was in the White House garden, I think. And she was approached by a rabbi who starts a conversation, apparently nothing to do with what followed. But once the conversation was struck up, out comes the camera as he starts asking her about her views on Israel. And the idea, and it worked, was to destroy Helen Thomas's amazing and long, long career in an instant by having her dubbed anti-Semitic and getting her fired from her job, which is what happened, as she'll talk about in a second. Helen Thomas died in 2013. She was 92. This is something like 3 years after this incident. And she points out that anti-Semitic is a complete misrepresentation of the truth, because the Semite peoples are overwhelmingly Arabic peoples, and as she came from Lebanese descent, she was a Semite, and not those who were accusing her of being anti-Semitic. And what happened after the clip of her talking about Israel and giving her views, which was promoted massively, by the way, and she was condemned massively by this so-called alt-right website, Breitbart, which is an ultra-Zionist front, like the whole basic alt-right is, what they dub the alt-right. Once this clip came out, everyone ran for the hills. Her employers ran for the hills. The journalists in the White House press corps ran for the hills and put out a condemnatory statement. Spineless, gutless coalition at work again. And Barack Obama called her remarks offensive and out of line and said her retirement was the right decision. Just a pawn and a fraud with strings attached. So this is the power of the Zionist lobby, not just in America, but in Europe and elsewhere, to terrify, intimidate, and freeze people into running around, when they can run around on their knees, that is, giving everything that these people demand, and destroying anyone that they demand be destroyed. Why is that? Why do they have that power? And why is it considered anti-Semitic to even ask the question? Why do we have now a definition, an official definition of anti-Semitic that includes, in effect, never being able to ask that question? Well, sod that, I'm asking it. Where does that power come from? So, here's an interview with Helen Thomas, and it exposes very clearly why mainstream journalists are terrified of not repeating the lies of the ultra-Zionist hate groups as they try to demonize people, and why they find it easier to demonize the innocent than to call out the hate groups. She's talking here in an interview after her career had been destroyed. It's an interview with a website called realnews.com. And she talks about how she was set up by the Zionist censors.
Jay in Washington. Last May 27th in Washington, veteran journalist and the veteran of the White House press corps, Helen Thomas, was leaving the White House. Somebody came over and asked her a question. Turned out he had a video camera. She answered the question, and that led to what many people think was a forced resignation from the Hearst newspaper chain, an end to her career covering the White House, one of the most renowned careers of the White House press corps. I, just for full transparency, at the time wrote a piece called In Defense of Helen Thomas. If you want to see it, it will be on our website. And now joining us to talk about what happened that day and what happened since and her views about that and the Middle East is Helen Thomas, who I don't think needs further introduction. Thanks for joining us. So Helen, talk a bit about that day, first of all. What was happening? You were leaving the White House, and what happens?
I had a friend with me, and we were encountered by this rabbi. I didn't know him. He had a yarmulke and he
This is
had
Rabbi Nessenhoff, I think is his
yes.
name.
And he had two sons with him. He said they want to be. He stopped me and said they would like to be journalists, and I said they should go for it. They'll really never regret it. And all of a sudden he says, "What do you think of Israel?" And he pulls out his cell phone, I thought, but I guess it was a camera. And I said they should get the hell out of Palestine. And I obviously was referring to them occupying all of the West Bank, Gaza, and all the places where they have come from nowhere to control and tyrannize the Arabs, Palestinians.
Now, there's been some debate whether you meant the occupied territories as they're referred to now, is mostly essentially the West Bank and Gaza, or did you mean Israel as defined by 1967 borders?
Well, if we could get them back to the 67 borders, it certainly would be a triumph. But they're not about to move anywhere. They keep taking and keep bulldozing homes on the West Bank. They have Jewish-only roads. They would never tolerate that here.
So what was your frame of mind when you answered the question?
I was free as a spirit. I had no idea that I was going to be interviewed. At the same time, I'm very blunt. I always try to answer honestly any question. I didn't know I was being interviewed. It was a sneak stealth attack.
The debate that's taken place, or part of the, there's been various debates that took place about what happened that day and what happened to you afterwards. What is your view in terms of the Israel within 67 borders, Palestine in terms of West Bank and Gaza? What is your view on this?
My view is that you should not create another nation in somebody else's country. And the Palestinians were 85% in the majority until they began the immigration for the Jews and for the Zionists too, because they had designated Jerusalem as their home, saying God gave it to them. Well, I mean, that's what God, who, and so forth. Everything like that is just very debatable. Jews have been persecuted all over the world. There's no question about that. Certainly the Nazis, I mean, it's too horrifying to think of what they did and the silence in the world when it was happening. At the same time, they aren't the only ones who fought in World War II. I had my brothers, 2 brothers are there, all my relatives, every American was involved. So it isn't the question of the Holocaust was a simple thing going on. The Russians lost 25 million people.
When the rabbi asked you, well, where should they go? You said, get the hell out. And he asked you, well, where should they go? And you said, Germany, Poland, America.
They immediately, in their propaganda minds, considered it Auschwitz. I didn't say that, and they know damn well I didn't say that.
Do you understand why it seemed to resonate?
I understand why they're always the victim. Nobody else is. It helps them.
Do you understand why it sounded to some Jews who may not even be?
I understand what they want to think, but it's not true. And they can't face that.
That being?
Saying that I'm sending them to a concentration camp. I mean, come on.
In terms of what you think should be done now, what the solution is now, what would you like to see?
I'd like to see the occupation ended. I'd like to see the...
and when you mean occupation, you're talking West Bank and Gaza.
Occupation of the Arab world. All. Golan Heights, everything. Gaza. What the hell are they doing there?
Some people tried to interpret what you said, meaning that Jews should get out of... that there essentially shouldn't be a country or state of Israel. The Jews should get out of the region.
Israel has already been recognized as a country by our country. And so you can't turn that around. It was recognized by Truman at 3 o'clock in the morning when the Zionists started knocking on the door and demanding. That's never been, no country's ever been recognized in that way. Debate was still going on in UN, but that's past history. They should get out of all the occupied territories, the Israelis.
One of the accusations, or one of the things that is said about Israel, especially there's people like Erwin Kotler and other people, they talk that Israel is the reflection or the product of a global Jewish identity. So if you attack Israel, you're attacking Jews. What do you think of that?
If they want to take that mantle for all the wrong things that Israel is doing now, so be it. I think they should deny that.
Well, I think the evidence is pretty clear that that position is not actually the view of a lot of Jews. So talk about what happened after you made the statement.
Well, I think that I was misinterpreted in many ways as being anti-Semitic. I'm more Semitic than any of these critics. So it made me laugh, really. What is anti-Semitic?
Well, you know that when they say anti-Semitic, they mean hatred of Jews. They don't, I know Arabs are Semites too, but the way the phrase is used, it means hatred of Jews.
They use it themselves. I have, it's horrible to say, but I can count so many Jews who are my friends and who do understand I'm anti-Israeli, but I'm not anti-Semitic.
Some of the people that support Israel say that you can't be anti-Israel and not be anti-Semitic. They say the two, one equates the other. If you're anti-Israel,
I
then
could
you're
be anti-aggression, anti-occupation, and so forth. Is that they want to put that on their mantle? No, I surely not. I know, surely, I cannot believe that they would assume that.
So what happened after your remarks went public? What was the next thing that happened?
Retirement.
So what's the story there? Why did you retire?
Why did I retire? Never by my own volition. Everybody's being fired for what they say these days. But not if you say anything about the President of the United States. You can call him anything in the book, but you can't say anything about Israel. Yeah. That automatically makes you anti-Semitic.
Well, so Fox News didn't offer you a job right away.
Not for $2 million.
Yeah, this is a reference, obviously, to Juan Williams, who was fired at NPR and was immediately given a $2 million contract by Fox to protect his freedom of speech, they say. But no one rushed in to protect your freedom of speech.
Well, I think I had some protectors, but, you know, it's I don't want anyone to stick their necks out and walk this line.
What did you make of the reaction of the White House press corps to your forced resignation?
Shocked. Shocked.
They issued a statement. Let me read the statement. This is an excerpt of the statement by the White House Correspondents Association. Helen Thomas's comments were indefensible, and the White House Correspondents Association board firmly disassociates itself from them.
I didn't say the board believed the same thing, and I can defend my remarks. People who are being brutalized every day, we all should be saying the same thing.
In your experience at the White House, has the White House Correspondents Association ever issued a statement like this before?
No, not that I know of. I've been there a long time.
So, I mean, what has it got to do with them, what a particular journalist has to say?
Nothing. They want to take away my awards and everything else. Who in the hell are they?
So when your employer, the Hearst chain,
right,
someone must pick up the phone and say, Helen, you've got to resign.
They were very nice to me. Very hard for any company to stand the kind of pressure. No, I think I don't blame Hearst at all. Any company probably would have.
But don't you think particularly a newspaper has to be able to stand up to this kind of pressure?
If they have courage, and if they don't mind losing a lot of money.
I guess that's part of the problem with the economic model of these news organizations.
Especially when they're going down the drain. Poor newspapers. I love newspapers. I can't live without them.
So in terms of your feelings now about what happened to you, about what was said, what's your takeaway of this? What conclusions do you come to?
There's no real freedom of speech in this country if you mention Israel. You can call the president everything in the book, and nobody says anything. They're all... But somehow this is the... no. This is off the... You've crossed the line when we talk about Israel.
What do you make of how most of the media covers the Middle East and covers Israel?
Very distorted. Very. I don't think it's fair at all. But at the same time, when it is fair, like AP would be fair, a wire service, people don't get it. They don't understand. The Palestinians are dubbed as terrorists, and all the Muslims are terrorists. I mean, this is so unfair. I don't understand people who would fight for civil rights in this country and anywhere in the world. But when it comes to Semitism, then you can't say anything.
Well, I know the blog I wrote in defense of Helen Thomas, which was on our website. It was also on Huffington Post. It got thousands and thousands of reads and thousands of comments, and the vast majority of comments were actually in defense of Helen Thomas.
God, that's nice to hear.
In a few days after you resigned, there was a poll taken in the Washington Post asking whether Helen Thomas should get her seat back in the White House press room. And apparently 92% of the people said, yes, Helen should get her seat back.
Good for them. Thank you.
Did you ever consider fighting this?
No,
How come?
because I think employers have the right to keep you or fire you.
Was your seat in the White House dependent on the job you had with Hearst?
No, not at all.
Could you have fought to keep the seat?
No, never.
Why?
Because it doesn't belong to me.
Well, a lot of people think it did. So you still have an audience out there.
Yeah.
Are you going to come out of retirement, perhaps? Are you going to do some writing?
Absolutely. I have a lot to say.
So there we go. 92% in a poll wanted Helen Thomas to continue. Tiny, tiny group of ultra-Zionist haters and censors decide that she won't. So she didn't. Oh, by the way, if there's any mainstream journalists watching, you have just been looking at a proper journalist. I'm sure you don't meet many, especially in this arena I'm talking about now. Your bloody spine's trembling. But that's a proper journalist, Helen Thomas, a dying breed who was prepared to say what she believed to be right and not just repeat with a spine trembling what these hate groups insist that they repeat. And we are now in a situation, as I said at the start, where this is being ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. And if we don't start calling out these hate groups for what they are and refusing to allow them to destroy the freedom of speech of the population, then they'll complete the job. Because, you know, freedom of speech is not the freedom for people to say what you agree with. Funnily enough, sits back in amazement, can't believe it. Freedom of speech means people being allowed to say things you don't agree with. Something that I'm sure will not be in some near future definition of freedom of speech. But that's what it is. And let's look at our kids, look at our grandkids, and think the world they are going to live in terms of their ability to have an opinion. When we see where we are now, and this is only where we are now, not what it's meant to finish. And these hate groups in Britain are going to be desperate to destroy my speaking tour across Britain of evening events in the spring. Because they don't believe that anyone should say anything that they don't agree with, so therefore we must destroy him, we must silence him. And the venues, when they're faced with that, and they will be, these people are nothing if not predictable. They need to look themselves in the mirror, the venue owners, and ask whether conceding freedom of speech to these hate groups and liars might just have a devastating effect on everyone's freedom. Because if I don't have freedom of speech, neither does anyone else. Because their freedom of speech will only be freedom to conform, not freedom to speak their own truth. And I've done a number of videos about this over the last 2 weeks, and I don't apologize for that for a second, because we're dealing here with something absolutely bottom line. And if we don't deal with it, there'll be no freedom left. It's our choice. Spine or no spine. Coalition of the gutless, or coming together to defend what is fast disappearing.